This was presented at the International Association of the Studies of Popular Music 2022 conference held in Daegu, South Korea. The conference was conducted in hybrid mode, and this presentation was held online. It was part of an organized panel titled The Languages of K-pop, and this particular presentation is Music as a Language. The title, A Homage to Disco, a music analysis of BTS's Dynamite. This presentation is an unboxing of the song as we travel back in time to the roots of the influences heard in the music. The discussion points include how Dynamite recaptures the roots of disco by analyzing the popular music conventions used and how it paid tribute to the dance genre, focusing on music and visuals, creating a retro ideal in both music and culture. But before that, just in case those of you who are watching don't know who BTS are, BTS stands for 방탄소년단. When they debuted in the summer of 2013, literally meaning Bulletproof Boy Scouts, BTS took its initials to a new branding of identity beyond the scene in 2017. Its 7 members take on the roles of rappers RM, Suga, and J-Hope, and vocalists Jin, Jimin, V, and Jungkook. The group is in their 9th year, having released multiple singles and albums, and an anthology. They announced that they would be focusing more on their solo projects at one point. But it's neither a hiatus or a disbanding if you have read or heard from anywhere. I'd like to call it, they're simply on sabbatical from public activities as a group. The group has utilized their success and popularity in the industry by taking on philanthropic roles as a way to give back to the community. Their biggest contribution would be their support to UNICEF in their Love Myself campaign, which the partnership was renewed. The group has also been a consistent supporter of Music Cares Foundation, a charity auction event hosted during Grammys Week. Here, we see that their outfits from the Dynamite music video that were auctioned off, and all of the proceeds went to the charity. In the next slide, I would like to introduce you to BTS's music styles throughout their career highlights. This includes their first music show win in 2015. Their first grand prize for Album of the Year in 2016. And their debut on the international stage at the Billboard Music Awards in 2018. So BTS comes in a kaleidoscope of music styles ranging from R&B, dance, electro trap, grunge rock, and electro pop, amongst others. Then they had Dynamite, where Big Hit Music describes it as disco pop. Dynamite was released on 21st August 2020 and written by David Stewart and Jessica Agombar, who have written for the Jonas Brothers. In an interview with Music Business Worldwide, David Stewart shared, the group was looking for something up-tempo, fun, and not take itself too seriously. I wrote it on my laptop in my bedroom. After 3 or 4 days, they were sold. They referring to Big Hit Music, which is the company, and BTS themselves. So BTS's first all-English single was birthed on a laptop in a bedroom during the pandemic and went on to become that year's summer hit. Dynamite is also included in their next album, D, as the last track. Now, let's connect the next dot and go back in time to the era of disco. There are multiple definitions and understanding of disco, both culturally and musically. Lawrence identifies disco as a highlight to the contributions of African-American gay men to its culture. Cronengold stated that disco was more than just dance music and included the participation in the traditions of soul, while Bayer claims that disco evolved from funk, another genre that developed from 60s soul music. Actually, the story of disco dates all the way back to the 1940s, with the word deriving from discotheque. Disco jockeys or DJs at the time were spinning records for dancing. The aesthetics of colorful lights, mirror balls, came around the 1950s, but it was really in the 60s, as Bayer stated, that Motown really hit it off with the sound that many identify with of the disco as we know today. And throughout the 70s, a string of hits identified as disco came onto the scene, starting with the theme from Shaft.
Who's the black private dick that's a sex machine to all the chicks? You're damn right.
All the way up to Gloria Gaynor's I Will Survive.
I've got all my life to live. I've got all my love to give. I'll survive. I will survive. Hey, hey.
So we heard this range, even though it's two examples, there will be more. Different examples of disco songs from the disco era. There were at least 3 obvious characteristics identified with disco. The thumping kick drum, playing the 4 on the floor pattern, a hook, and instrumentations of brass and strings. Then in 1979, disco was declared dead, where destructive actions like chants of "disco sucks" rang through a baseball game. But from this anti-disco movement, it gave life to house music in the 1980s. But it wasn't until the 1990s where there was a reminiscence of disco that came in the form of Jamiroquai's Can Heat. And every decade after that, from the millennium, we had disco-inspired or disco-influenced songs from Kylie Minogue, Daft Punk, and the next decade in the 2020s, we had BTS. So as we continue to unpack Dynamite in its label or categorization of disco pop, we have Bayer, Garofalo, Cronengold, and Lawrence supporting that auditory experience that we just had of disco music. And the pop category of Dynamite, the definitions from Boyle, Firth, and Woolridge echoes the identities of pop music, such as exposure by mass media, being commercial, and singable. So how did Dynamite recapture the roots of disco music? Here is a breakdown analysis between Dynamite and various tunes in disco. Now, I like to preface here that these selections were based on the music elements and, of course, the popularity of the disco songs at that point of time. So the first element that we're looking here is the element of pitch. The singable and catchy phrase of the opening of Dynamite.
'Cause I'm in the stars tonight, so watch me bring the fire, set the night light.
Mirrors the hook or catchy phrase of the Miracles song Love Machine.
I'm just a love machine, and I won't work for nobody but you.
One of the composers, David Stewart, claims to have used the Beatles method, where the song opens up with the chorus that catches the attention of the listeners from the get-go. Now, in terms of tempo, Dynamite falls just slightly below of 114 beats per minute. And by below, I mean below a general beats per minute for disco tunes, typically between 115 to 140. But I wouldn't worry too much because the pop style or the pop element, the element of tempo in pop generally averages 120 beats per minute. But it was the rhythm element in Dynamite that really was interesting to unpack, and it pieces the puzzles to disco. Earlier, the term four on the floor, defined by Cronin Gold and Lawrence, this is heard in the first verse itself of Dynamite. We get that same thumping feel in Love Trade by the OJs. Now, the rhythmic element was also present in the guitar riffs. Now, Dynamite has a total of 4 guitar riffs, but I will only be playing the first and the fourth guitar riff simply because the second and third guitar riffs, they're there, but you probably need really good earphones during this presentation, of course. So I will only be presenting this first guitar riff here, which is a more melodic phrase, single notes. And the fourth guitar riff, very clear because it's playing chords in the second chorus of Dynamite. So the next 2 elements in Dynamite that I looked at is the instrumentation. Now, brass as well as strings actually are associated with funk music. Excuse me, not strings, just brass associated with funk music. But brasses have always been used in disco, as heard in music by Kool and the Gang, Casey and the Sunshine Band. So the brass instrumentation in Dynamite had this melodic line. Now take a listen to this particular melodic line. Let's not forget, Bee Gees is also a very popular group during the disco era. Now, this last element here that I've managed to analyze is the brass attacks. Again, brass being a feature instrument in disco at the end of Dynamite. That particular rhythmic pattern there, it could be a citation, whether intentionally or not, heard in Jackson 5's I Want You Back. So we've heard the musical homage of Dynamite to disco, but Dynamite also featured multiple visuals and cultural citations as well. The song paid tribute to an entire era with representations of the minority during the disco era of anti-gay movements and anti-Black community. In the Dynamite music video, we see a burst of colors in the background while the group dances, the top picture there. That pays tribute to the LGBTQ group that is historically connected to disco music. Additionally, there were multiple citations to Michael Jackson, whose influences we are able to trace back to the early days of Motown and disco alike, him being part of Jackson 5. The multiple pop culture quotes, dance movements actually, as put together by a BTS fan, draws parallels to Jackson's moves. So this actually opens for discussion. If BTS looked up as far as to their own influences of Michael Jackson, as many K-pop artists do, or did they go further back in disco history to present Dynamite in the overall production? Now, in addition to all these cultural citations or quotes, there were also visual, the words, the lyrics that were presented that relates to popular culture. Cup of Milk, referring to the Got Milk ad, and Off the Wall, which is actually an album by Michael Jackson himself. So here in the visual aspects of Dynamite, we see, again, these disco representations. The covers of their EPs here really colorful, and each of these EPs have 4 remix tracks in addition to the original and instrumental versions. This particular idea of remixes suggests that Dynamite cited cultural elements of disco. As mentioned earlier, the word disco comes from the word discotheque. Having multiple remix versions is something that DJs do when they spin the records for dancing at the discotheque. Interestingly, BTS released Dynamite on vinyl. The fancy colorful lights is an imitation of the white light reflecting the mirror ball, giving this rainbow color that we see here in the Dynamite cover art. Again, citing another connection of disco to the queer community. The cultures of disco are also presented in BTS's stage performances, such as a roller skating rink with full retro outfits for the Tonight Show on Jimmy Fallon. A dance break, paying tribute to Michael Jackson at the Melon Music Awards. And in this graphic here, the rainbow colors in the LED backdrop and dance platform in their live performance in 2021. Now, this is only a small number, selected 3 out of 30 over other stage performances of Dynamite. So in summary here, the composers of Dynamite, namely, again, David Stewart and Jessica Agomba, have shared with multiple interview outlets they did not expect the level of success the song would bring. At the time when the brief was released, Stewart shares that Big Hit Music was just looking for a song that is catchy, up-tempo, and fun. He says that the success factor was simplicity and perhaps a really good title. Jessica Agomba, however, had that intuition that Dynamite would be a worldwide hit. So Dynamite indeed revived the roots of disco by featuring clear elements such as 4 on the floor, singable catchy phrases, use of horns in its instrumentation. It also utilizes the conventions of pop music, such as a very clear verse chorus, and also had a modulation in the last chorus, which was a personal choice of Stewart. All of this encapsulates the disco pop label of the song. Dynamite also paid tribute to disco culture through its visuals and overall production. This was evident in the representation of queer colors and retro performance outfits, 9 remixes across 2 EPs, and also releases on vinyl as well as cassette. Dynamite went on to achieve a series of successes as seen here, including another 2 all-English singles, Butter and Permission to Dance. So from this research here, it has brought to light further discussions on the following. With the re-emergence of disco music, each decade bringing newer sounds, but keeping the musical essence, what can we look forward to for disco perhaps in the 2030s? The second question came from my attendance at a book talk by the author of Soul and Soul, Dr. Crystal Anderson. She shared her views that K-pop is one of the representatives of the global R&B branch, which evidently traces back to the roots of African-American music. So I reflected on that statement there, and I asked the question, as K-pop continues to embrace the sounds and cultures of the West, would we be able to finally drop the K from K-pop? Thank you for watching.